Hello class and welcome to Module 6. Down into the home stretch, into the Valley of Death, rode the 600. Just kidding, it's a joke. This week we're going to be talking about technology integration. And specifically whether or not it's a good idea to outsource technological requirements from the IC to the larger industry community. And if that's not a good idea, how does the intelligence community integrate technologies into itself that facilitate collection analysis of whatever int it is that we happen to be doing? Simply put, the pace of technological advancement is at such a brisk pace that it's very difficult for the intelligence community to keep up with it in terms of research and development, and then identifying concepts, and then developing those concepts into systems that are capable of collecting, and then fielding those systems to make sure that they're okay, and then doing acquisition and acquiring those systems, and then integrating them, etc. So if we follow the normal process of the federal government to be able to do from a research development to fully integrating a new system, it would go back to flip phones, right? Maybe not quite, I might be exaggerating a little bit, but that cycle is not an overnight cycle. It doesn't happen in 2 months, it doesn't happen in 6 months, it doesn't happen in 2 years. It takes a long time to be able to do that. And increasingly, as we talked about, as I mentioned last week, where we start to see the threat move more to the cyber realm because of the availability of technology, and we see how transparency and this more globalized community starts to impede the way the U.S. has historically done some of its operations. What does that mean for us in the intelligence community, and how do we get access to those types of technologies? I'm going to give you an example. You may or may not remember, but a couple years ago, there was a mass shooting in San Bernardino, California, and part of what was acquired by law enforcement was the perpetrator's cell phone afterwards. And so, what ensued after acquisition of that evidence basically was a big legal struggle between intelligence entities, law enforcement, and the manufacturer of the phone, who didn't want to give up proprietary information so that these entities over here could access the information that was in the telephone. Okay, so that's a tell right there, by the way, not to go that route, but that they did not have the ability to be able to do that, to acquire that. So that's an example of anytime we think that there's going to be a target arising and we need to go after that target, we have to understand the technology that's in play, that we have to understand what it is, what is the essence of that target. We have to understand everything that makes it work, right? So we have to reverse engineer it, make sure we understand how it works, and then we have to develop a countermeasure to it. So another example of things that are going on right now in the unmanned community, which I know some of you are associated with, as am I, is for 10, 15 years and longer, really, from the U.S. military perspective, in working with unmanned aircraft, it's been make the aircraft, make the aircraft, make the aircraft. So several large defense contractors in the United States are the predominant purveyors, I guess, of unmanned aircraft to the military. We'll keep their names out of it since I work for a defense contractor too, but some large companies make those, right? And because of where we were fighting, it was like, we got to get them, and we got to integrate them, and we got to get it to the box, and blah, 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 blah. Well, the second wave of that is now afoot, and it has been going on for several years, but increasingly, as I read technical volumes, it's getting higher and higher and higher, and that is the counter-unmanned agenda, right? So we develop the aircraft to be able to do it, and make no bones about it, if we have it, other people have it too. And by that I would say our predominant potential opponents, such as China as an example, obviously would have unmanned aircraft. Russia probably has unmanned aircraft, etc. So as we develop that technology and they're developing theirs, and we understand it becomes a very mutual capability, the next step then is that we have to develop a way to counter it, right? And then the next step from that is to defend ours against the ways that they're developing to counter ours. Do you see that evolution? Do you see how that works? And that's a paradigm that would apply to many, many different things across the intelligence field, okay? So it's like, we got to understand it, then we got to develop our own version of it, and then we got to develop a way to counter it, and then if they've developed a way to counter ours, we've got to develop a countermeasure. And it sounds asinine, but it is the truth. It is the truth. And so when we look at that technology thing, right now, is it a good idea? How do we handle that? I mean, can the federal government handle it? So when you're going through your readings this week, and this week I have several outside sources, because and I'm going to probably try to find in the next year or so. I'm sure somebody's starting to write a book on it because it's a thing, as I just said. But right now, obviously, it's articles, journal articles, etc. So that's a predominant part of your reading this week, so that you can kind of read some of the things that are going on out there and some of the companies that have, in the last 5 years, been providing support to intelligence. Is it a good staffing idea from the perception of the intelligence community? If not a lot of people, I'm trying to think of the way to put this. So many years ago, it was a thing. I keep kicking my table too. I beg your pardon for that. Many years ago, 50 years ago, people grew up and they wanted to be a G-man, right? That was the old expression, a G-man, meaning they wanted to work for the government, right? Elliot Ness and the FBI, and I want to be a G-man. And I think that there's an element of that culturally that still exists out there, and there's a level of that still that exists in individuals who are hardwired to serve, where there are people that are hardwired to serve. They just want to, whether they're serving in like a nonprofit, or in this case, they want to come and serve the government, serve the United States, serve the military, etc. Okay, so those people still kind of exist out there. Increasingly, though, and not in part, not totally. That's a double negative. Increasingly, however, a level of distrust in the federal government is prompting people to not want to work for the federal government. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to pick generations or et cetera. So because it's across the board, that the transparency and our ability to see, oh, the emperor's not wearing any clothes, oh my God, that type of thing that's going on are people like, I don't want to work for the government. I don't want to go work for the National Security Agency. I don't want to work for the CIA. There will always be people that want to, but maybe the levels aren't as high as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, right? Now, couple that with the technology advances. Now I'm a young engineer, I'm a software engineer, and I'm building X, Y, or Z, and I have several job offers. I get an offer from the federal government to come work at the National Security Agency to help design intercept systems, right? Or cyber intercept systems, or infiltration systems, or hack into X, Y, or Z, right? Or I get an offer to go develop games or develop apps with a small company in California, and etc. So it's an ethical decision, and it's a personal decision, and I choose to go work for the private company. When we look at the integration of technology into the intelligence community in terms of collection and analysis, maybe it is advantageous to the federal government to outsource those requirements so small companies are actually building the devices, and then it's being integrated into the system. And I don't mean necessarily, in this case, it would be contracting, but they're not contracting to perform the services. They're contracting to build the ability, basically the capability, whether that's a system or a process, etc. It's the same thing with big data storage. The federal government can't store all that data, can't store all the data that they get, so what do? We outsource it. There's some huge things going on in the state of Nevada regarding giant data facilities. And maybe it's smart of the government to outsource it. So those are some of the things that we're going to look at this week. We've come through collection and analysis, and we kind of understand what it is. We have technology over here, and we live with it every single day. We work with it every single day, right? And now we need to understand those challenges when they exist. Look at the challenges we have with like just Blackboard, right? Sometimes, oh my God, we're having a moment. I'm not putting the university down, but sometimes you have those types of challenges. Now take that to an agency like the National Security Agency that deals highly with computers. CIA, the same way. FBI. When we look at the Joint Terrorism Task Forces and the fusion centers again, that level of collaboration, which is increasingly occurring via technological interfaces. So how do we do that? More importantly, how do we determine what the next thing the bad guys are going to be doing? What's the next big technology that's going to go into the hands of the bad guys? And how do we mitigate their ability to, from a nation state, let's say, covertly manipulate our circumstances here in the United States by access? How do we keep bandits from hacking into our economic structure and causing economic damage? How do we keep threats that could be terrorist or not, or from hacking in and holding people hostages in hospitals, from hacking into our power grid and damaging the power grid? All of these are threats. All of these are threats, right? Unlocking vaults that have illnesses stored in them in a secret place. I don't want to say its name in a video, but places where we've stored viruses and stuff like that, and release something and somebody breathes in it. I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but the reality is science fiction is now. Science fiction is only the distance of your own imagination right now. So from an intelligence community perspective, it's a Leviathan from processes, etc. But you as a student, you get an opportunity to pretend you are that king or queen for a day and take a look at that and say, wow, is it advantageous for them to outsource it? What are the risks if they outsource it? Is it better if they keep it in? You know a little bit about collection and analysis now. Do we have to outsource to technology companies to be able to facilitate that? Do we have to work with, is it the future writ large? It's just going to be that way because there's no way the federal government can keep up with the pace of innovation? Is that a possibility too? So these are some of the things that I want you to think about this week. And so you have your discussion due this week, and then you have your little media exercise. And the little media exercise is you have an ancillary reading by an author that has to do with the use of social media by the intelligence agencies. Okay, so in your media exercise, it tells you what to do in the syllabus, but essentially I want you to go out there and do kind of like a straw poll and look at some of these social media sites that are being used by the intelligence agencies, and then answer the prompt that I give you related to that media exercise. Okay, that's not a huge assignment. It's very small. It should only take you 15 minutes really to do. So it's not a lot of writing, but that's what your deliverables to me are for this week. Okay, so think about it largely, because if you may be one of those people, right? You may be. If we sat down in a coffee house and I told you about what technology was like when I first started, and I'm just going to say it flat out. Let me think. 37 years ago. So 37 years ago, I started in the intelligence community. You would not believe. I mean, I don't believe it sometimes. I would probably forget things to be able to tell you. That is how exponentially different that environment is now. And I would tell you in the last 20 years that the rate of change is through the ceiling. It's constant. It never ever stops. Whereas in the first 20 years, it was pretty static because of the Cold War, right? So it can happen just that quickly. And if we're not abreast of that change, and if we don't have that fluidity to be able to move with that change, and you're caught flat-footed, that is when disaster strikes. And I'm not being like a, oh my gosh, the sky is falling type person, but this is one of the reasons that we talk about technology in this class and how it informs intelligence processes. And it's going to become the foundation. Really, technology, if it hasn't been already, it's going to increasingly become that broad foundation because it's going to be not just the way that we execute by this laptop that I'm talking to you by, but actually in this air that I'm talking to you through becomes the new operational environment. And this is where we're executing our operations, is in this ethereal place, right? And if they do it to us, it's bad, and we've got to be able to do it back, right? In terms of gathering information or mitigating a risk, mitigating a threat, right? So that was a rabbit hole that I just went down, like Alice. But I had to get it off my chest, and thank you for coming along on that ride. So that is it. I also this week strongly suggest that you look at your final paper prompt and start fleshing out an outline of what it is that you want to write related to that paper. Maybe start drafting it, etc. Because next week you'll have the one last discussion, which is really a half discussion because there's no real interaction. It's just your final opinion on something, and then that final paper and exam. So I don't want you to be all pig-piled at the very end. So make sure that you kind of are, sort of starting to lay out what that paper is going to say, what that paper is going to engage. Okay, don't wait to do your research the day before the paper's due. Okay, so that is it. That's it. And I'm going to put my lightning back in a bottle and cork it back up. And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye. And I still haven't turned it off. Lovely. I'm still here. It's like the end of the credits at the end of a movie.